Jack Miller had always prided himself on being a man of solitude, but the quiet of his small house on the outskirts of town felt different now. It was no longer the peaceful stillness he had once cherished, but an oppressive silence that weighed heavily on his heart. Since retiring from the police force, he'd found it increasingly hard to fill the void left by the years of service that had defined him. His house, once a home filled with the bustle of life, now echoed with the haunting emptiness of days stretching into one another. His wife, long gone, had left a space in his life too large to fill, and though time had dulled the ache, it never truly left him. One evening, as the blizzard howled outside, Jack sat by the crackling fire, staring into the dancing flames. He hadn't expected it, but something small and unassuming pierced through the quiet of his world. A noise, faint at first like the soft whimper of a distressed animal. Jack froze, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. He listened more intently. There it was again, tapping against the window, then a soft bark, followed by the unmistakable sound of a whimper. Confusion flickered in his eyes. In this kind of weather, who would be out there? Reluctantly, he stood up, putting on his worn coat. His old knees creaked, but there was an urgency in his step, a feeling that this moment was one he couldn't ignore. Stepping outside into the snow, the cold bit at his skin, but his breath caught when he saw them. There, nearly buried in the snow, were three figures. A German shepherd, her body trembling violently against the storm, and two small puppies, their fragile forms huddled together for warmth. The mother's eyes locked with his, filled with an odd mixture of fear and trust. They were strangers to him, but something in those eyes, something deep, pulled him forward. The sight of them broke through the walls Jack had built around his heart. He couldn't leave them out there. Without a second thought, he bent down, his hands shaking, and carefully helped the animals inside. The warmth of the house hit them like a wave, and for the first time in days, Jack felt a spark of life return to his tired soul. Days passed, and Jack's home, once a place of quiet despair, began to feel alive again. The storm outside raged on, but inside, the warmth of the fire, the soft rustling of paws on the hardwood floors, and the rhythmic sound of breathing filled the house. Mira, the German shepherd, had quickly made herself at home, though she remained cautious. Her eyes, always watching, seemed to carry the weight of untold stories. Jack could feel that she was a survivor, just like him. Her resilience mirrored his own quiet strength, and there was something undeniably comforting about her presence. The puppies, Max and Ruby, were a different story. Max was all energy, bounding through the house with an exuberance that almost made Jack laugh. Ruby, on the other hand, was quieter, more reserved, often curling up in a corner to watch the world unfold around her. But both of them, despite their youth and fragility, carried an undeniable spark, one that Jack hadn't realized he was missing until they arrived. The joy they brought into his life was like a fresh breeze after years of stagnation. Every day, Jack tended to them with a tenderness that surprised him. He fed them, bathed them, and made sure they were comfortable. The bond between them grew steadily, like the roots of a tree finding firm ground after a long season of storms. Each time Mira looked up at him, her golden eyes filled with gratitude and trust, Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose. It wasn't just the act of caring for them, it was the connection they shared, the unspoken understanding that they were all, in some way, healing. One afternoon, after a long walk through the snow-covered woods, Jack sat by the window, looking out at the swirling storm. The house was quiet, save for the sound of the dogs settling around him. Mira, ever watchful, lay at his feet, her head resting on his worn boots. Max and Ruby curled up beside the fire, their tiny bodies warm and content. Jack let out a deep breath, something heavy lifting from his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. These dogs, this strange little family, had shown him something he thought he had lost forever, the ability to care, to protect, to love. And as the snow continued to fall outside, Jack finally realized that in saving them, they had saved him too. It was just another cold, quiet evening when the world outside began to shift. Jack had just finished his dinner, the remnants of a stew simmering in the pot on the stove, when Mira suddenly bolted upright, her ears straining towards the door. Max and Ruby, usually content after a long day of play, had gone still, their little bodies stiffening beside the fire. The hairs on the back of Jack's neck prickled. Something was off. He rose from his chair, instinctively moving toward the door, his heart racing in his chest. "What's wrong, girl?" he murmured, bending down to Mira's level. Her golden eyes were wide, filled with an intensity Jack had never seen before. Then he heard it. A faint sound, footsteps crunching in the snow outside, slow and deliberate. Not the hurried scamper of an animal, but the steady, purposeful stride of a human. Jack's blood ran cold. He hadn't expected visitors, and the only people who would be out in this kind of storm were either lost or desperate. And yet, this felt different. There was something in the air, a growing unease that weighed on him. Before he could even consider his next move, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, too measured to be casual, too forceful to be accidental. Jack hesitated, his eyes flicking to Mira. The dog was already on her feet, growling low in her throat, her body tense with warning. He opened the door just enough to see who it was. The darkness of the night swallowing the edges of the porch. A man stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, his face hidden beneath a dark hood and thick scarf. His eyes, however, were unmistakable, cold, calculating, and full of something Jack couldn't place, but didn't trust. "You don't know me," the man said, his voice rough, as if it hadn't been used in years. "But I know that dog." Jack's pulse quickened. The man was staring at Mira, his gaze fixed with a mix of anger and regret. Jack could feel the weight of the statement hanging between them, and suddenly he understood. This man had a claim to Mira, but it wasn't the kind of claim anyone should have over another living being. Mira. Jack's voice was barely a whisper, but the name seemed to trigger something in the man. His lips curled into a bitter smile. "She's mine," the man said flatly. "I had her before you, and now I'm here to take her back." Jack took a step back, Mira's growl growing louder at his side. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "She's not yours," he said firmly, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "You're not taking her anywhere." The man stepped forward, his boots crunching against the snow, his body pushing against the door. "She's a trained guard dog. You wouldn't know how to handle her. She's been through more than you could ever understand." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. This man, he could tell, had hurt Mira. There was something in the way he spoke, something possessive, that told Jack everything he needed to know. This wasn't about love or care. This was about control, about cruelty, about taking what he saw as his without any consideration for the suffering it caused. "I said no," Jack growled, his voice now hard and unforgiving. "You're not welcome here." The man's expression twisted with frustration. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he snarled. "She's dangerous, and you're just a lonely man playing at being a hero. You don't deserve her. I'll make sure you regret this." With that, he took a step back, his hand brushing the inside of his coat, as if reaching for something hidden. Mira let out a sharp bark, her stance protective and fierce. Jack's instinct screamed for him to act, to get the man off his property, to keep his family safe. "Get off my property," Jack said, the words colder than the snow falling outside. The man paused, his eyes narrowing with rage, but then he turned and disappeared into the storm, leaving Jack with only the echo of his threat ringing in the air. Jack closed the door, the weight of the encounter sinking in. He looked down at Mira, her body still rigid with tension, her eyes never leaving the spot where the man had stood. "We'll be ready," Jack whispered to her. "We'll make sure he never comes back." But as he looked out into the blizzard, he realized that what they had just faced wasn't the worst of it. The storm outside had been nothing compared to the storm that was coming. The days that followed were filled with a tense stillness that hung over Jack like a thick fog. Each night, he found himself checking the locks on the doors, glancing out the windows into the snow-filled void beyond, expecting the mysterious man to return. And each time, the same question gnawed at him: how far would the man go to claim Mira? Jack was used to being alone, but now, with Mira and her pups by his side, the fear of losing them consumed him. He hadn't realized until this moment how deeply these dogs had become a part of him, how their presence had breathed life back into him. Mira had saved him as much as he had saved her, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack heard it again, footsteps crunching in the snow. He stood up so quickly that the chair clattered behind him, sending Max and Ruby into a frantic bark. Mira, ever alert, was already by the door, her body tense, eyes trained on the darkness outside. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't need to see the man's face to know that he was back. This time, however, Jack wasn't waiting behind a door. He was ready. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept near the door for emergencies. His hand wrapped around it tightly, knuckles white. With a deep breath, he swung open the door and stepped outside, his boots crunching in the snow. The cold wind bit at his skin, but it did little to deter him. He wasn't going to back down this time. And there he was, the man, standing a few yards away, his features barely visible in the low light. But his eyes, those cold, empty eyes, were unmistakable. He was carrying something now, an old, rusted metal pipe, a weapon. "I warned you," the man said, his voice low, gravelly. "I told you she's mine. You should have listened." Jack's grip tightened on the bat, his body bracing for what was to come. "Mira's not yours. She never was," Jack said, his voice steady but edged with fury. "She's my family now, and you won't hurt her." The man's lips curled into a sneer. "You think you can stop me?" he said, stepping forward. "I'm not leaving without her." In one fluid motion, he raised the pipe, swinging it with surprising speed toward Jack's head. Jack barely had time to react, but he raised the bat just in time, the two weapons clashing with a sharp metallic sound. Pain shot through Jack's arm, but he held firm, pushing the man back with all of his strength. The man staggered, but didn't fall. He lunged again, more violently this time, his face twisted with rage. Jack swung the bat again, narrowly missing the man's side, and before he could recover, Mira was there. The German shepherd leaped forward, teeth bared, growling fiercely as she charged. She collided with the man's legs, knocking him off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. Jack could hardly believe his eyes. Mira wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting him. "Mira!" Jack shouted, but the dog was already on top of the man, her protective instincts in full force. The man yelled in pain, flailing beneath her, but she held her ground. Jack knew he had to act fast. With a surge of adrenaline, Jack rushed forward, kicking the man's pipe out of his hand and grabbing his arms, pinning him to the cold ground. The man's struggles grew weaker as he realized the fight was slipping from his control. He was no match for Jack's determination, nor Mira's ferocity. "You're done," Jack said through gritted teeth. "Get up. Get out." The man's eyes burned with hate, but his movements slowed as Mira stepped back, her growls quiet but still warning him. Jack knew he had to end this now. With one final push, he shoved the man away. "Stay the hell away from my family." The man didn't speak. He simply rose to his feet, dusted off the snow, and backed away into the darkness, his eyes never leaving Jack and Mira. As the storm raged on around them, the man disappeared into the night, leaving nothing behind but the fading echo of his footsteps. Jack stood there for a moment, panting heavily, the weight of the confrontation settling on his chest. He glanced down at Mira, who was now standing beside him, her golden eyes calm, watchful. "You did it," Jack whispered, his voice full of awe and gratitude. "You kept us safe." Mira didn't respond with barks or wagging tails, but the pride in her eyes was unmistakable. She had kept her family safe, and that was all that mattered. As Jack turned to head back inside, Max and Ruby bounding happily at his heels, he realized that the fight wasn't over, but neither was he, and neither was his newfound family. Together, they had faced the darkness and come out stronger for it. In the quiet that followed, Jack closed the door behind him, locking it securely. The storm outside howled, but inside, with Mira, Max, and Ruby by his side, he knew he had found something he would protect with every ounce of his being. The weeks following the confrontation were filled with quiet healing. The storm had passed, both outside and within Jack's heart. There was no sign of the man who had once tried to steal Mira back. No more fear of losing his newfound family. The winter winds still howled through the trees, but Jack no longer felt the sting of loneliness that once gnawed at him. Every day, He woke up to the sound of paws padding across the floor and soft whines of excitement as Mira, Max, and Ruby greeted him with unwavering loyalty. The house was alive with the joyful sounds of dogs who had found their forever home. And Jack had found something he never thought he would have again, a reason to smile. The days were longer now, with the sun beginning to break through the winter clouds, casting a warm golden glow on the snow-covered ground. Jack took Mira and the pups on long walks every morning, letting the quiet of the forest soothe his mind. He watched as Mira ran ahead, her coat gleaming in the sunlight, and Max and Ruby chased each other playfully in the snow, their barks of joy filling the air. It was a sight Jack had never expected to see a family, in the truest sense, and he was part of it. One evening, after dinner, Jack sat down on the porch with a cup of coffee, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He could hear the soft panting of Mira as she lay at his feet, and Max and Ruby curled up beside her. The warmth of the moment spread through him, and he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. He had saved them, yes, but they had saved him too. They had brought him back from the edge of solitude, showing him that no matter how dark life seemed, love could always find a way through. It wasn't just about rescuing them from the storm. It was about letting himself be rescued in return. The quiet of the night was broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. Jack felt a peace in his chest, a peace that had eluded him for so many years. Mira, who had once been lost and broken, was now the heart of this small family. Max and Ruby, once frail and helpless, were now full of life, bounding around with endless energy. And Jack, once a man consumed by loneliness, had found a place in the world once again. As he looked down at Mira, who lifted her head to meet his gaze, Jack smiled. A true smile this time, a smile that came from the heart. "You were right, girl," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "We were meant to find each other, all of us." And with that, Jack realized that the family he had always dreamed of had been there all along, in the most unexpected form. It wasn't just about blood or circumstance, it was about the love they had given each other, the bond they had forged through every moment of struggle, every moment of triumph. As the night grew deeper, Jack leaned back in his chair, content, knowing that he had finally found what he had been searching for all these years. Not just a family, but a home, a place where he belonged. Sometimes, the family you choose is the one that saves you the most.